So, since we already have Heather here, let's start the conversation. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Casual Conversation. My name is Lulu Sofiana. I'm the host of Casual Conversation. For you who haven't responded the questionnaire, please check your chat box and answer the question. I'm gonna share to you the result of the question. As you can see here, we have 4 questions. The first one, I'm aware of my implicit bias. Yes, some of you aware of your implicit bias. And the second question is, I think American is smart. And yeah, still most of you believe it is. And then the third question, it is about one of ethnicities in Indonesia, which is Papuanese. And the statement is, I think Papuanese are left behind, and somewhere you are below the average, 2.8 disagree about this, so the rest of it agree about this. And then the last statement is, I think that my friend who have a fair skin is more beautiful than my friend who have a dark skin. And it is good that most of you are disagree with this statement, because yeah, we were born, we basically cannot choose what our skin color is. So yeah, it's the baseline of our conversation today about implicit bias. Let's say hi to our guest today, Mac from Virginia. Hello, Heather. Welcome.
Hello, nice to see you. Thank you. I'm so sorry I was late. We had daylight savings time here. Do you have that in Indonesia?
Oh.
You do?
Oh.
Okay. No, you do not.
Yeah, maybe you want to explain, Heather, what is daylight saving? Some of the students might not know about it.
Yes. Well, that's what I was wondering. We have in the United States something that most people it's called daylight savings time. On a certain day in the fall, all back 1 hour. And so I thought that tonight we were meeting at 9 o'clock my time, but because we have daylight savings time, that was really 8 o'clock our time, so I was running late. Then in the spring, the clocks go forward 1 hour. And they used to do this, all started historically because of farmers, because our country used to be more agrarian, mostly farmers, and so they wanted to maximize the amount of daylight hours so that they could farm. Now the United States is definitely not an economy that is mostly farmers, but we still have daylight savings time. Was that hard for you to get used to when you were here, Lulu?
Yeah, I remember I was late coming to the class because I do not know about daylight saving. Is it always what date usually the daylight saving start? Is it always in?
Yeah, I don't remember. I honestly don't remember.
You don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just when we are told. I don't pay attention. I don't notice. It's just okay. It's time.
Okay then. So, shall we start to discuss our today's topic about implicit bias?
Sure. It's interesting because a call with some people I work with yeah? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I work with in Ethiopia, and now I'm on a call with all of you in Indonesia, and it is amazing that we can stay connected like this. So Lulu, do you want to introduce me, or shall I introduce myself, or do they already know
Yes.
who I am?
Most of the participants are those who joined with your previous session about homeschooling. So most of them are already.
Oh, great.
But of course, you can introduce yourself, please.
Okay. So my name is Heather Fromack, and I live in the United States in Virginia. I made friends with Luluk when she was a student at George Mason University, and so was I. And we sat next to one another in class, and we got to know each other. And the wonders of Facebook allow us to continue to be friends, even though she has returned to Indonesia. So last time I was with you all, we talked about homeschooling, because that is a part of my life, has been a part of our life 18 years now, I guess. And I also work professionally for an organization that supports homeschooling. But something that I also do is I teach people about bias. And that is something that I'm learning more and more about. It's something that all of us can learn more about, and all of us have. And so this is going to be an opportunity for us to learn some things together. So I'd like to share my screen, Luluk, if we can go through my PowerPoint. And I also want to prepare everyone that I'm going to share a PowerPoint. We're going to go through some information, but I really want you to talk to each other, to me. It is much more interesting, and it will have a much greater helpful impact for all of us if we can talk about it. So please feel free to interrupt. I will be asking for your opinions as well. Okay? Please speak up if you want to say something, because I can mainly see the screen. But so the first thing I'd like to know is I appreciated Luluk's little quiz ahead of time. So Luluk said, who is familiar with implicit bias? So would anybody like to answer the question, what do they think of when they think of bias?
Lydia, do you want to share your thought about implicit bias? Like your baseline understanding about that?
About implicit bias, I think that we tend to think that something is better, or we have stereotypes about it.
That is really well said. Especially you mentioned the word better, that we think some things are better. And that's just true for everyone. Bias can really be thought of as something that, my screen is not working. There we go. As just preferences, beliefs, attitudes, preferences, just things that we like better, some things than the others. So biases can be neutral, or they can be positive or negative. So for example, you can have a bias about what your favorite color is. My favorite color on that picture there is the pink. You know, you may hate pink. That's a bias. And that's not positive, negative, it's just neutral. But you might also think, okay, well, what is your favorite dessert? That's a bias, that's a preference, that's a belief. I believe chocolate is the best thing in the world. You may not like chocolate. That's okay, it's just a bias. It's not positive or negative. But when we start talking about people or types of people, and we might think that one is better than another, like you said, Lydia, then that becomes a more important topic to talk about. But when we talk about bias, we can just really think of it as a preference or something we believe. So we're going to sort of practice the part of your mind you don't notice, and we'll just kind of watch that at work. Because implicit bias, the kind of bias we're really going to talk about today, is the kind that is unconscious to us. It is the kind of thoughts and attitudes and preferences we have that we don't really notice. And so how many triangles do you see? If you look at this picture, you can see triangles, but how many triangles do you see? Does anybody want to say?
For me, I see 2 triangles.
Yeah, so you can see triangles, but really there are not triangles there, are there? There are lines, there are shapes, but your brain fills in the gaps. It fills in the empty spaces when our brains don't have all the facts. Our brains fill in the gaps, right? So we fill in those gaps, and we can do that. And that's called mental heuristics. And these are just mental shortcuts that our brains take every day in order for us to survive. So triangles. So you're seeing your brain fill in the gaps even when you don't have all the facts. Here is another picture. that helps your brain kind of see how your unconscious mind. Can you see the old woman here on the in this picture on the right? Can you see her chin there at the bottom? And can you see the young woman also? Yes?
Yeah.
So when your brain sees a picture like this, at first you might see the thing that you're looking for. You might see the old woman first because that might be easier. But as soon as you see that it is both the young woman and the old woman, forevermore, when you see this picture, you will see both. This is your unconscious mind learning to make what is unconscious conscious, to make what you cannot see become something that you do see. And this is a very important part of how the brain works with bias too. So this is an example of how our brains will fill in gaps or see things as our conscious mind tries to work with them. So let's try with me. Let's do an impolite question. Now we are going to take this from triangles to pictures of women to actual people now. And because our mind works in the same way with people in our lives than it does with triangles or drawings of older and young women. When we don't have all the facts about people, we can be unconsciously choosing to fill in our ideas about that person based upon unconscious assumptions, preferences, biases, things that we have learned from other people. So let's just pretend this woman here is me, and you don't have to answer the questions out loud, but I can ask you, what do you think of me? Do you think that I have a lot of money? I am a white woman in the United States. What do you think about my family? What about my home? What kind of automatic assumptions or stereotypes would you have? Because I'm a white woman living in the United States, would you think I would have my own home? Or what about my education? Now you know a little bit about me because you know how I met Lulu. I met her in graduate school. But if you think about it, what would be your automatic thought about me the minute you met me, before you knew anything? Be conscious. Start to think, what do I think about this woman? What are my automatic thoughts about this woman, just based on the little tiny bit that I know? But how would that change if I were Black? If I was a Black woman, would you have the same assumptions? Would you have the same stereotypes about my education or my money or my family or my home? Or what if I was an Asian woman? Would you make the same assumptions about me? Everybody makes assumptions. Everybody makes automatic thoughts. It's not on purpose, but as we start to become aware of our biases about each other, we can have healthier relationships. So just remember, our brains will fill in the gaps when we don't have all the facts. When we don't have all the facts, our brains just automatically fill that in. So let's talk about the different types of biases that we have. There are two types of biases. There's explicit bias, and explicit bias are those things that we can see, we can control, we are aware of. I like chocolate, you like, banana. Those kinds of automatic things that we are aware of. But the other type of bias that we're really going to talk about today is the implicit bias. And the implicit bias are the ones that are preferences, beliefs, attitudes that are automatic. They're unconscious. We're not aware of them. We don't control them. They come from hidden places in our minds. And this is where, like Lydia said, prejudice, stereotype, blind spots, that's the kind of bias that we're going to talk about today. And we all have these blind spots. Everybody does. It isn't something that just certain people have and other people don't. We are made this way, and we're going to talk about why. So our brains, this is so interesting to me. we have two systems of thinking in our brains. We have system 1 thinking, and we have system 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is that automatic, unconscious, emotional, fast, effortless kinds of thoughts. That is system 1 thinking is like the automatic thoughts you had about how much money I have, or what kind of education I might have, or how many triangles were in that picture. It's not something you intend to think. It's just automatic, system 1. And that's unconscious. It's implicit to us. System 2 thinking is that rational, explicit bias where you're conscious of it. You're taking time to intentionally think about it. It's systematic. It's slow. And here's the thing. It takes a lot of effort. System 1 thinking, no effort, automatic. System 2 thinking takes effort. And that's why it's harder to control system 1, because it's so much easier to think like that. So we're going to do this little exercise so you can watch your system 1 and system 2 brain in action, okay? So your brain is always working to read. Once you can read in any language, you can't not read. And once you understand colors, you can't stop your brain from knowing the colors either. So what we're going to do is you're going to see this blue arrow. And I want you to think to yourself, or you can even say it out loud. I want you to read the word. Okay? Read the word. So this first one, you see the arrow? Red, green, red, blue, blue, yellow, green. Okay? That was easy. That was automatic. Anybody have any trouble with that? Probably not. But now when we go over to this other incongruent list, we're going to have to use our system 2 thinking, that effortful, conscious, hard work thinking, because now I'm going to ask you to say the color that you see. Don't read the word, say the color. Okay? So here we have green, red, red, blue,
yellow,
yellow,
blue,
blue,
green.
So that was harder, right? That was harder. And that's because your system 2 brain had to take over from what your system 1 brain was automatically wanting to think and say. That's the difference between system 1 and system 2 thinking. And again, our system 1 thinking is our first reactions, the first automatic reaction. It takes no effort at all to do it. And honestly, that is where 95% of our first reactions come from. They come from that part of our brain, that part of our brain that is effortless. It is the system 2 thinking that's only 5% of our first reactions, and it requires intentionality, that slow, deliberate, reflective, effortful, analytical. System 1 thinking is where our implicit biases live in our brain. System 2 is explicit bias. That's how our brains are working, and that's how everybody's brains are working. And so this isn't something to be ashamed of. This is just how life works for everyone. So how did implicit or unconscious bias get formed in us? We all have implicit bias, but they're different for each one of us. So how did that happen? Well, implicit bias helped us to survive. When our ancestors a long time ago had to make quick automatic decisions and decide, is this my friend? Or is this my friend? we had to be able to make that decision quickly. So which would you say? Who is the friend? The one on the left or the one on the right?
The left.
Yeah, he looks like the friend, right? So implicit bias, if we have no information about these men, do we? No information at all, but we're making an automatic assumption, and that helped us to survive. But the problem is, when we don't have context, we can make the wrong decision. So in reality, when we have context, we see that this man was actually our friend. He was trying to protect us from, from the bear. So it's helpful to remember that when we do not have all the facts, our automatic assumptions about people can be wrong. And when we realize that they can be wrong, it helps us remember to slow down and get to know people, just like Lulu is trying to do with these conversations. With these wonderful conversations, she is helping bring context, better context to relationships. So let's talk a little bit more about what causes us to have bias. Everybody grows up with a family. Everybody grows up with some measure of religion or no religion in our lives. Sorry for the teeny tiny little picture up here, but that was to represent Indonesian television. But Indonesian television, we have television here, of course. So social influences like our families, our friends, where we grow up, where we go to school, what we see on TV or no TV, all of that creates those biases in our minds that we can't control. We don't have any control over where we're born or who we grow up with, but that is a very important thing to keep in mind when you're creating context for those relationships as you get to know people. So why does this matter? Well, I'm sure you can probably understand why implicit or unconscious bias matters, but let's talk a little bit about what we know from research about it. Some of the things we know about from research is that we can't help having implicit bias. We can't help it. For everybody, implicit bias impacts our choices, actions, and behavior. We can't help it. And another thing is that oftentimes we can't even believe it, because often our implicit or unconscious biases can directly contradict what we want to believe about people. Many studies have shown that people who are who even work in social justice, or they're police officers, or they're judges, they're people who have been trained to not have bias, they still do. And when those contradict, if you say, no, I would never be biased about somebody, it stops you from growing. It stops you from learning. And we have to know that sometimes what we want to believe is different than what we actually think about people, so that we can grow and make change. We also can't deny it. Even if we don't think we have bias, and in the United States, I don't know how it is in Indonesia, but there are plenty of people who think, oh no, I don't have bias. Other people have bias, but I don't have bias. Well, that's just not true, and it's helpful if you ask people who know you what your blind spots are, because other people who know you can tell you, yes, you do have bias, you just don't see it, and I can help you see it. And here's the final point about that. We can't help it, we can't believe it, we can't deny it, but if we are loving, we will seek to correct it. And love your neighbor as yourself. None of us wants people to look at us and make automatic wrong assumptions about us. So we need to love other people in that same way and take the time. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what's happening in our brain. So we talked about system 1 and system 2. And we also talked about when we don't have all the facts, the brain fills in the gaps. Just like the triangles, just like when you looked at me and you didn't know all the facts, your brain will fill that in. Your associations, the things you associate with me or with each other, or if you think in your mind, who are people that I don't know well, but I really think I know a lot about them? Those are associations you've gained somewhere, but not from relationship, not from really knowing them. And those can be distorted. We all struggle with that. And remember that implicit, that unconscious, and explicit conscious beliefs, they develop differently in the brain. They develop differently through your experiences, your education, so they can conflict with each other. They can contradict. But also remember that implicit bias is not a wrong thing to have. Our implicit biases, we rely so that we don't die. We have to be able to make automatic decisions day in and day out for survival. So our brains were designed this way, and now we have to think about how to be aware of that and make the needed changes that we do. All right, so are there any questions so far? Any questions about bias before we talk about different types of biases?
Any question, everyone? Please feel free to turn on your microphone or write on the chat box. Yep, Lydia.
Why we tend to think that white color is better than the black one. And I just think about archetype of Jung. Is it like that? I think that's like implicit bias or no stereotype or something about that told before is happen from one generation to the next, or it happens when we grow up and there's no relations, there's no correlate about archetype of Jung like that.
That is such a good point, because all of us are raised with families who were raised by their families, who are raised by their families, who are raised by their families, right? And those family influences can be passed down generation to generation. But the great thing about learning about these biases is that we can be a part of changing what might not have been good influences in the past, and making changes so that the next generation will be better. So I will give you an example from my own life. My grandparents were racist. They were wonderful people. I love them so much, but they did not like Black people. They did not think highly of them. Now, they would never, ever have admitted that. It was implicit. It was unconscious to them. But we could see from the comments that they might make, or the ways that they would relate to Black people, that that's the way they felt. Well, our family has chosen to adopt Black children. We do not feel that same racism that my grandparents felt. That probably was partly due to my parents giving us a little different view. And now our children, of course, are being raised in an environment where their brothers and sisters are a different race. So we hope that they will be able to raise children who do not have that same bias. So you bring up a very, very good point in that, I mean, we respect our families, we respect our parents and our grandparents. They do the best they can. But we are learning new things, and so we might be able to do better in some areas for our children. That's a really, really good point. Thank you.
Uh, thank you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts so far? I really want to know what your thoughts are, especially, we are in different countries. And so your experience with bias and with groups of people and families is going to be so different from mine. So I'm so curious to hear your thoughts about all this.
Yeah. Anyone want to comment or asking question? While waiting for the participant, Heather, I think my parents also.
Racist? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The difference is that in Indonesia we have many types of ethnicities. In Indonesia, we tend to have racism based on from what ethnicities we are. We have Papuanese, we have Sundanese, we have Javanese, we have Bugis, as Lydia, and all are different. We have too many differences than similarity actually.
Yeah. Mm.
Live in the same country. So yeah, do you think is it because of for if I analyze like my parents' situation, I think it's because they limited interaction with people who are different from them because they just live in that city. Yeah, they never went to any other part of the Indonesia even. Maybe they just go to 2 or 3 cities, and also it's their education. It's just elementary level. So I
Mhm.
understand the way they think, even though I disagree, but of course we still respect them as the way.
Yeah. Yes, and I love what you're saying, Lulu, because it's just pointing to that same thing we talked about with the triangle. When the brain doesn't have all the facts, it fills in the gaps, and oftentimes it fills in the gaps using whatever information we've been given, whether it's by previous family members or what we see on TV. But you're absolutely right. When we live in situations where we can't have relationship, we just have to guess. It's like that caveman. Is that a bad guy or a good guy? I don't know. There's no context for it. And so it is difficult in some places. I don't know how it is where you live, but in some places where you live, it is very difficult to even find someone of a different ethnicity to build a friendship with. Do you have that where you live? Like just people who are very much the same kind of live all together?
People are very much the same. Yeah, Japanese live with Japanese, Sundanese,
Mm-hmm.
Sundanese, Bugis live with Bugis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have that here very much too, and so it takes special kinds of effort to, just like we talked about, system one thinking is effortless. You don't have to do anything, it just is there. System two takes like what you're doing here. You're very intentionally, Lulu, bringing in people from different places, from different cultures, from different experiences, and now everybody here, including your guests, get to interact with people that you don't live next door to me. I cannot meet you that way, right? So what you're doing here is so important. And I think that because of technology, also, because of YouTube, because of television, because of movies, even if you can't meet people who are different from you, you can still learn about them. And that can be like, remember when we went through the two reading the colors, that's sort of like reading that second set of colors. It's making yourself learn to think differently about people, and that is so important and helpful, because then maybe you will meet somebody like that someday and you'll be ready to start a relationship. And that's like, Lulu, let me ask you. You came to the United States, and when I met you, you were very friendly, and I was very friendly to you. I was not uncomfortable with you. You were not uncomfortable with me. what were some of the things that helped you get ready to meet people and become friends with people who were so different from you?
I think my education plays a great role on shaping the way I treat people who are different than myself. So I think when I come to the US, even we have like the cohort where I was prepared before coming to the United States. We have a short course training, some sort of like training that prepare
Uh-huh.
on diversities, on like bias that we can have. So when we are in the United States, we are ready to interact with people from diverse ethnicities or culture or country. So yeah, basically we are prepared. There are training for that, 6 months training.
Really?
Yeah.
When you did that, did you talk about bias?
Yeah, we talk about bias, but not at implicit bias, I guess. It's explaining several type of culture that this might happen also in the US, this might happen, which we previously might not know that this thing could be happen there as well. The one that I told you, I never know that Asian students are well known for their intelligence in the US. I do not know that.
Yeah.
So it's irony because many Asian students feel, I know that they feel, so sometimes we discuss and they feel like inferior with their language barriers, and they, although I, for instance, in math, I know that they are smart, they are good at math. It's just they cannot explain it in class, well as the American counterpart. But
Because of the language.
yeah, because of the
Yeah.
language. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of the language, not because of the lack of understanding, of lack of sensitivity to understand the environment and circumstances. So I think basically we are all the same. We are all human beings, and we do not lessen than others or better than others.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's amazing. That's wonderful you had that training. That's very powerful. I wish everybody could have that kind of training. But everybody can have that kind of training, but sometimes we have to do it ourselves. Sometimes we don't have the privilege of going to a program like you did, Lulu, but there's plenty of resources for us to learn. And especially once you start to realize that your natural, easy tendency is going to be to do what we have up here, affinity bias. Everybody does this. This is just normal, but this is a very common bias. And there are thousands of different biases. We're just going to talk about 2 today. But affinity bias is the tendency to warm up or give preference to people who are in our in-group, basically people like us, okay? Like we just talked about. You know, we tend to go to school with those people, we live near those people, we make friends with those people, we start to think that that they are the preferred people, and other people are just a group. So we tend to think of ourselves and people like us as individuals, and then we think of people that we don't know very well more as a group. So it's harder for us to feel sympathy or understanding for those people who are different because they don't feel like individuals. They feel more like this group of people that don't have families or feelings or struggles in life. And this has a scientific name. It's called cognitive disregard. And it is the idea that we see groups as sort of this other. They aren't like us, they're different, they're other. And it reduces our motivation to want to exert energy on those relationships. They don't seem as important to us. So we can, cognitive disregard just basically means we don't care. That's a fancy way to say we don't care. we don't know those people. We don't care about those people. We care about our people. And so you have an us versus them kind of mentality. And of course, that does not bring people together. And so all of us are trying to avoid exerting energy. I mean, at heart, most of us just want to do the easy thing. So affinity bias causes us to really focus our energy on the familiar. And so it takes intentional effort again, that system 2 thinking, to be intentional, to overcome that, to try to begin to get to know other groups of people as people, not just as groups. So this is a good cartoon of showing implicit and explicit bias with affinity bias. This gentleman says, diversity is good, pass it down. So he believes, or at least he's saying with his system 2 explicit bias thinking, diversity is a good thing. But there is no diversity in that room. There is no diversity. They are all just together exactly alike, agreeing with each other. And so we have to recognize that this is our tendency, just like everybody else. So that's affinity bias. Now, I want to tell you about this test you can take. This is a test that will help you and 20 million other people for free. You can go on the internet and take, they have lots of different kinds. It's called the Implicit Association Test, the IAT. And you can go and you can take a race IAT, you can take a gender IAT, you can take, do I have a preference for fat people or skinny people IAT? There's all kinds. And essentially what it does is it works with that system 1 thinking. Remember I said that's fast, it's automatic. That's what our unconscious bias thinks, is those automatic associations. And so it times how quickly you make your response so that it can start to show you what you unconsciously think about different types, different groups, different people. So one common one is the black-white race attitude test. And it will give you these words underneath a face. You can see under the black man's face are good words like beauty, happy, joy. And underneath the white man's face are negative ideas, filth, sick, greed. And then it will flip these words around and see how quickly you can get the words. One of the interesting things about this particular test, is that, go back. One of the interesting things about this black-white race test, as I said, there's 20 million people who've taken this test so far. It's put out by Harvard University. And they have discovered that no matter what your race, even if you are black, you can tend to favor the white race, white faces over black faces. So why do you think that happens? How can that be? I'd like to get your thoughts.
Anyone have a thought about this? Why we tend to choose white people over black people or over other skin colors? Well, I think for me, it's maybe because of the media, I guess, or if not the movie that we saw, or the toys even that we used to play when we were a child. Even me, myself, I also play a Barbie doll.
Yes, right.
No one seems like a Barbie in my environment. So yeah, I still remember a time where I really, really, really want to have a blonde hair, a skinny.
Yeah, right. Where in the world would that come from? Yeah, from your toys, from the media, from the culture, from the books, from the picture books. And all of those things are a part of what the United States, and other Western cultures especially, there's a lot of effort being made to change that, to make opportunities for there to be more positive associations for all skin colors, all races, and not just white skin. But it's very interesting that unconscious is working in being created, even when it's obviously the opposite of what you would want to think. So here's another type of bias. This is the other one we're going to talk about today, and then we're going to be done. So confirmation bias, let's get that picture there. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and remember information in a way that confirms what I already thought. So it's basically the idea that I like to be told that I'm right. If I already think something, I like to watch the news that tells me I'm right. I like to talk to the friends that tell me that I'm right. I like to read the books that tell me that I am right. That is confirmation bias. And in some ways, that is helpful because the brain seeks patterns. We need patterns, just like when you looked at the old woman and the young woman. You were looking for shapes and patterns. Your brain was trying to put together all the little lines and drawings to come up with something that was familiar to you. That's survival. We have to be able to do that to live in this world. But what can happen is we can start believing what is familiar, even if it's opposite of what the facts are. I mean, in the United States right now, we have people struggling because the facts are Joe Biden won the election. But there are people who really, really, really believe that Donald Trump should win the election. And so even though the facts say he didn't, they're still seeking ways to confirm that that's not true. Now, that's a simplified way to explain all the things that are going on politically in the United States. It is much more complicated. But it is a good example of the facts not really mattering if you have confirmation bias. Sorry, I don't know why these keep changing. So this can lead to poor decision making. And when we find that system 2 thinking to be too much work, we just default to system 1. We just go to what's familiar to us. So that is confirmation bias. And here are some examples of confirmation bias. So, for example, not seeking out objective facts. So maybe all the radio stations that we listen to tell us the same thing, or the TV, or the books, or that we just resist even seeking out facts that might be different to what we already believe. Or you can interpret information in such a way that it already supports what you believe. You can also just only remember details that uphold your belief. Now, we do this all the time in our families, right? We think, well, I made the bed. I know I made the bed. And someone says, no, you didn't make the bed. I only remember the details that remind me, yes, I'm neat and tidy. Of course I made the bed. Maybe I didn't, maybe I did, but I want to believe the best about myself. So I only remember those things that are good for me. And the other thing is that it can cause you, confirmation bias, can cause you to ignore information or disregard information that challenges what you believe. Now, I am a person of faith. Many of you are people who have strong religious faith too, or values or convictions. This is certainly not to say that we shouldn't have beliefs that are strong, that are not going to change. But this is more on the idea of people, of what we know about people, what we believe about people, not what we believe spiritually or character-wise, etc. necessarily, although that's important to process. We're really talking about how we relate to people. And so we have to be careful that we seek more context than confirmation. So at the end of the day, our bias can turn into prejudice. And that's what we have to be careful of. So as you look at all these pictures, maybe just take a minute, now that you're aware that you have two ways of thinking, an automatic way of thinking and system one thinking, and a more conscious way of thinking. Why don't you take a minute and look at each one of these pictures and notice, what was my first thought or feeling about those people? But then what do I want to think about those people? And see if there's difference. So I'm going to give you a minute to notice your brain at work as you look at these people. So would anybody like to share? Did you notice anything in yourself that you're willing to share? There's no pressure to share. These are personal things. But, did you perhaps notice a first response that you became aware of in your consciousness that maybe you might not have been aware of before? Maybe you are becoming more self-aware of your first reaction and discovering that you don't want that to be your final reaction, that maybe you'd like to change that. Any first reactions that people wanted to share?
Heather, while waiting for the participant to raise their hand, we have a comment from Yuli.
Okay.
So I think it's basically, she asks, how can we have a different point of view in the midst of society or environment that told us to think that way? For instance, in this case, if the society told us that black people is bad, how can we stand and still have a different opinion about that?
That's a wonderful question. That is a great question. What that shows is that she's taking that intentionality of system two thinking to change. Just like you were telling about your training that you went through, Lulu. She's looking for ways to train herself, and that's the point. That's an A+, 100%. That's the choice that all of us need to be making. So I just want to congratulate her, because that is excellent. And the great thing today is we can do what is called, we can do some things that are called counter stereotypes. We can seek counter stereotypes. So counter stereotypes mean that when you identify a group of people, maybe it's black people in the circumstance, that you know what, I recognize that I have a negative bias towards those people. What you can seek are people who are the opposite, that's counter stereotype, of your stereotype. So if your stereotype, for example, is that, black people are lazy, you can read a book about George Washington Carver or Oprah Winfrey or Maya Angelou, or you can find black people who have accomplished great things, and you can watch a movie about them or read a book or watch a documentary, and that will help counter or change the negative stereotype that you have. And that has been shown by science to have a positive effect on our implicit bias. So what Lulu said at the beginning is absolutely right. We are all human beings. We are all people. We all have families that we love, and feelings and struggles and intellect and dreams. We all do. But because we're separate, or because we have wrong thoughts about each other because of our unconscious bias that we didn't choose, we have to be intentional about changing our minds about people and seeing them as people. So counter stereotypes is one of the best and easiest things you can do, and over time you will find you will begin to change. Now the second thing, which is the best thing but not always possible, is to have relationships with people who are different. The best possible thing would be for you to have relationships with Black people so that you can see that they are people just like we are. So I want to invite, Luluk, you are on our Mom Safe Space Facebook group. And that is the whole point of that group. So let me just invite all the women who are here. If you would like to be a part of our Facebook group, it is called Mom's Safe Space. And the whole point of the group is to bring women from different cultures. You do not have to be a mom. To bring women from different races, cultures, ethnicities, to a place where they can get to know each other, hear each other's hearts, struggle together, ask honest questions about one another, and learn. So even in the absence of someone you can know face to face, you can know them on our Mom's Safe Space group. Ask to be invited, and I will let you in. So that's a lot of words. Are there any other questions, or should we move to the end here?
Yeah, is there a question, everyone? Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to finish here. So here's the great news. We all have blind spots, but the good news is that once you have seen something, you can never not see it again. So for example, this picture of this old woman and this young woman, if you got to the place where you could see both women, you'll be able to see them from now on. It won't be invisible to you. So what was once a blind spot in your mind, like, oh, I can't see the young woman, no longer will be a blind spot. And that is when you've brought the unconscious to the conscious. And it's the same true for our biases. Once we notice, okay, I have affinity bias. I seem to think of that group as unimportant. Oh no, now you can start to counter that. You can see that. Those are the counter stereotypes that we just talked about. This is a great place to be, and it means progress. It means that you will grow. The other thing is that once we bring what is unconscious into our conscious, it's malleable. And malleable is a word that means it's changeable. It's like clay, or I don't know if you have Play-Doh in Indonesia. Yeah, but like Play-Doh, where you can mold and shape it. So once you become aware of things, you can do something about it. And just remembering to be patient and kind with each other. Everybody has bias. Even people who teach about bias have bias. So there's no judgment. There's no harshness. I'm not harsh with my grandparents. They did not know that that's the way they saw the world. And we will all need each other to help us see those blind spots. The great thing is we can all learn to manage and change them. So that is my presentation for today. And so thank you so much. Are there any thoughts, questions?
Heather, could you please show us the picture of the lady again?
Oh, sure.
Participant who still cannot see the old women.
Okay. Let me get that.
So yeah, the face of the young lady is the nose of the old lady. The ear of the young lady is the eyes of the old lady. And necklace of the young lady is the mouth of the old lady. So for you who still cannot see, where is the old lady? Because the participant, some of the participants cannot see, where is the old lady? I just can see the young lady. So that's what also happened to our bias, right, Heather?
That's so right. I was thinking that very thing. because there will be times, this is a fantastic example, there will be times when other people will be able to see your bias and they will say, you really have this blind spot and you can't see it. You just don't see it. But if you find people in your life that you trust who can help you see it, over time, you will. Just like if you study this picture for a while, you will. And so will I.
Yeah, there's a comment from Jeremias, and oh, no, I see it. So
oh, yay!
he can see it. So I think in terms of our bias, we can also ask someone else to help us to see where our bias, right?
That's exactly right. That's a fantastic point.
Also, there is, and I want to remind everyone that we are going to end our conversation soon. If you still have question, you better ask it now, or you ask question because we're gonna end this conversation soon. And I want to comment on the Lydia's point that we are taught to be racism somehow by the television, by the books, by friends, family, maybe, and social media. And actually, Heather, I think the participant also want to know how do you perceive us as a Muslim? Because when the time I study in the US, there are a lot of bad news about Muslim people. Like we are seen as a whole, as what you say, we are seen as a whole. So when the terrorists that create the bad things that happen there claim that they are a Muslim, so the whole Muslim society affected by their statement. So that, and I wonder how do you perceive me as well when we first met in our class, or when you see other Muslim in the US, because somehow I think I ever experienced something bad during my time in the US because of the stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was on the street, I ever experienced something bad happened to me because of my veil, my hijab.
Yeah, that's well, I am a Christian, and when the terror and prior to the terrorist attacks, I had never known anybody who was Muslim.
Really?
And no, never had met anyone who was Muslim. And that was partly because I grew up in Southern California and in Texas, and there was just not opportunity to meet them. So when I came to Virginia, I lived near Washington, D.C., and I did see a lot more women with the hijab and the veil, but I didn't know them. So when the terrorist attacks happened, I, like so many other people, I did that. I put all Muslims into that scary group that because I didn't know any. And what happened over time was my children were on soccer teams, they were on different activities, and I began to get to know women who were Muslim. And I saw what wonderful mothers they were. I saw how intelligent and how lovely and kind. And I decided to intentionally be very friendly because I could see that in our country that it was very difficult. And I would purposely get eye contact, and I would smile, and I would be warm, and they would respond that way to me too. And so it moved a group into people. It moved this other group who I didn't know and who I was scared of and didn't understand. And it turned them into mothers like me, with children that they love like I do. I'm going to cry. And so when I met you, Lulu, I had already been through all that. And so getting to know you was really a privilege to me, because you were so open about how different, the different cultures and different way your family led. And I invited you to our Easter gathering. I felt comfortable doing that because you seemed also to have a very open mindset about getting to know from another faith. So I, like you, I believe God created all people. And I believe that all people are valuable because of that. But it took time. It took people, individuals in my life to help me be comfortable with that. So that's my feeling about it.
Yeah, I think not only Black people that are affected by what media portray about them, and also like the Muslim society. Like Muslim women always portray as oppressed by men, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there are many stereotypes about Muslim
Yeah.
women. So, and also like the hijab, isn't that sometimes like people easily commented, isn't that hot in this summer? They use that. Yeah, it's fine, but in my perspective, it's actually protect me from the sun, so that
Yes.
protect my hair and also my face maybe. And that is why I also show you my picture. I think in class when I'm at home, when I'm with my husband, for instance, when I'm not using a hijab, so that because some people think that we will always use this, even though we are going to bed or wherever we are, we will never take off this hijab. So I feel like somehow I need to keep explaining myself during my time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's very tiring. That's very tiring. And I appreciate one of the things that my Black friends will say is that when they go into environments where it is primarily white people or not Black people, it can be very tiring because people want to touch their hair, or people want to understand, they ask questions all the time that because they feel so different, just like you're explaining with your head covering, and it takes people like you and people like my friends who are willing to answer the questions, who are willing to help be teachers, to help whole groups of people understand one another. Because you were willing to step into those spaces, and people like me were also willing to step into those spaces, and now we can know one another, and it becomes more like, oh, that's so interesting, rather than, oh, that's so weird. It can become curious instead of furious. But we have a question here, or a comment in the chat. I think we can't really normalize bias, because even though we have our personal bias and perception, I think it is not a good thing to normalize something like stereotypes and racism. I mean, if we normalize bias and all of that in society, how can we make this world a better place for everyone? How can we make this world a safe space for everyone? Absolutely. I'm hoping that you're not thinking I was ever saying the fact that we all have bias means that it's okay. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that we all have bias, so we should be sympathetic to each other. But we should also be intentional about changing those things and calling them out, calling those blind spots out. I mean, we called that out on my grandparents all the time. Grandma, you can't say that. That's not true. That's not right. So I agree that we do not want to normalize bias in a way that makes it seem like, oh, well, we all have bias. That's okay. Forget. No. The point is to recognize it so that we can change it. So thank you for that comment. Speaking of comments, I would very much appreciate you all sending your honest comments about my presentation to Lulu. If it's in your language and that's more comfortable, great. But I am really seeking feedback on this presentation. I really want to share this information to more and more people, and I want to do it a better job of that. So it would really mean a lot to me if you would send feedback to Lulu and just say, I liked it, I didn't like it, this is how she could do better, this is what I thought was amazing. If there is anything you thought was amazing, I would really appreciate that. So Lulu, will you help me to gather some feedback afterwards?
Sure.
Thank you.
And I think, Heather, you did a great job in explaining implicit bias. I'm aware of implicit bias, and I know I have some implicit bias, but then it's hard for me to explain to people what is implicit bias. But the way you explain to us with your analogy and with your picture, I think it's great. And I think you should think of becoming a professor in university because you explain.
Well, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. So I want to remind everybody too, I'll type it here. If you are on Facebook, Mom Safe Space, just ask for, it's a private group, so you have to be allowed into the group. But if you want to, ask to join, go right ahead, and I will, and put in the comments that you know me from this conversation, and we will let you in, and you can get to know women from other cultures there, and it will be a great opportunity for you to continue to grow in your cultural intelligence in that way. So thank you so much to everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I look forward to talking to you maybe another time, and please do give Lulu feedback. I would appreciate it very, very much. So thank you all, and have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining the casual conversation. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.